Hello, nonprofit rock stars and heroes. This is Tom Check with Greater Impact Consulting, where we help you streamline Salesforce for your org so you can focus on creating more impact in your communities. And today we're talking about reports, but we're talking about them in a little different way than we have before. In previous videos, we've gone through kind of the nuts and bolts of this screen versus that screen, and that's really helpful if you're at a certain point and feeling stuck. But let's zoom out a little bit and talk about how do you go through the whole process of designing a report in Salesforce for your org. It's one of those things that we kind of take for granted that a lot of times you're doing in Excel or you're familiar doing in other systems, but how do you do it in Salesforce? So today we're going to just walk through the process that I go through when I'm creating a report. And it's going to be similar but different for you. And the first step is really starting with the what do I want question, right? That outcome of what am I trying to report on? So for my test use case today, what I want to do is I want to get a report of all closed opportunities the month that they closed so that I can start to see patterns of when do my donors give. So even just that part, that far into the process, I've already got a couple of things that I need to be paying attention to. One is what objects am I interacting with? In this case, it's a fairly simple use case, so I only need to report on the opportunities object. If I wanted to pull in information about accounts and contacts and when certain tiers of donors give and that kind of thing, it would be a very different type of report. And so knowing up front what I want my end result to be makes it so that I can figure out what types of report I need to run, what objects, and I can start to figure out what filters I need to use. So the first thing I do is I get really clear on what do I want this report to do. In our use case today, we're going to create a report for closed opportunities by close month so that I can see what types of opportunities are closing in what month. This is something that is really valuable, or at least it was in our nonprofit where I worked, because we wanted to find the patterns of when do people generally give. If they're giving a tax credit donation versus a major gift, do those happen at different times of year so that we can segment and really specifically create asks that hit them right when they're naturally in that mode of giving anyway? Or, can we send something out a month before we generally see the majority of our planned giving gifts pledge? Maybe we should go through and create a giving plan and a campaign so that a month before our spicy time, right, when things are getting hot in the planned giving world, we can really target those people who are most likely to give those gifts. So this type of report is fairly basic, but it is a real life use case that I think is really valuable. So closed opportunities by month and record type. That's what I'm looking for. So let's open up Salesforce and start to go through how we do this. So you'll obviously have to be in your reports window, your reports tab. And when you go to create a new report, this is where you have to identify the objects that are involved with your report. And it's important as you choose a report type to recognize, and there's a whole video on this that we talked about, there's a primary object and a secondary object. So if you report on contacts with opportunities, it's going to by default pull in all the fields for contacts, and then it'll only show you contacts who have opportunities. If it's a contacts with or without opportunities, it'll pull in the contacts, and if they have opportunities, it'll show them, and if they don't, it'll also show them. But for those contacts that do have opportunities, it'll pull in the opportunity information as well. So the report type that you choose has to be based on the outcome that you want. So if you're looking to get contact information and opportunity information, you might go with a contacts and opportunities report. In our use case, we're just looking for opportunity information, none of the contact info, and so we're just going to pull in opportunities. So the second step, after we identify what we want, we have to filter it so that the right records are showing up. And this is where sometimes it gets a little confusing, sometimes it gets a little overwhelming, and it's also really important that you make sure that the right information is showing up in your report. So we need to make sure that we're filtering it to fit the need. So in our use case, the primary things we're interested in are the record type. What do we want that displayed? But that's not what we filter on. We want any closed opportunity to show up. So we're looking for closed opportunities by month and record type. So that closed opportunity is where we start to determine our filters, which records we want to show up. So we go into the filters portion here, and we adjust our filters. By default on an opportunities report, the close date is going to be current fiscal quarter. You can change the close date to all time. And we want to make sure that our opportunity status is closed won. And that's all the filtering we have to do in this case. And if all we do is run this report, it's not super helpful because we've got 289 rows, and that is the data we want, but we're not seeing it the way we want it. And so after we identify the filters so that we get the right records, right? And the filters will change depending on the outcome that you're shooting for. But after you filter it and you have the right records, then it's a matter of how do I want this data to show up? In my case, I want to see the close month by record type for each type of opportunity. So for that, I'm going to go into Edit, and I'm going to end up creating what's called a matrix report, or if you're used to using Excel, this is very similar to a pivot table. And I'm going to group my rows by record type, opportunity record type, and I'm going to group my columns by close month. And now we start to see something pretty neat. If I hide the detail rows, right, if we assume that I don't need to see all of the rows happening here, then I can see that if I hit run, this is kind of interesting. I need to tweak it a little bit, but I'm getting what I want. I see that there were 8 event tickets sold in October, and I can look through and I can say, okay, when does the bolus dose of my major gifts come in or my donations come in? And full disclosure, full transparency, the data in this demonstration org that I'm using is fairly randomized, and so we're not going to be able to pull out a ton of patterns. But in your org, you most likely will see patterns where, oh, I don't have any donations in the first 6 months of the year, but then people start paying attention to what their tax liability is going to be, and all of a sudden, October, November, December, I start seeing tons of them come in, and then again in March as people get ready for tax day. And so I'll start to see all of that show up in my big long matrix report here. And I can see that I've got totals, right? I've got totals for the month and also totals for the type of opportunity. So let's make this a little prettier. If I go into close month here, if I go into edit, and I can group date by, what I want is I actually want the calendar month, not the day of the month. And that just makes it a little prettier. Similar numbers or same numbers should show up, but the way that it shows up on the column labels is a little prettier. Now, let's say that you want to show this differently, right? You want your record types along the top and your months along the side so that you can just see it a little more clearly. How do you do that? It's pretty straightforward. In this case, we would switch these around so that this is the record types. Let's close out of that first. So we want this to be close month on the group row and record type on the group column. We want to make sure that we are showing that by calendar month. Then I'll hit run again. And if I hide my detail rows, now I see all of my close months on the column side, and my rows are based on the record types. So this might be a little easier to see depending on the data you've got if you want to scroll up and down or side to side. So this is, at its very basic, fantastic. We've gotten a report that shows us the number of opportunities that close in a given month by record type. Generally, I also care about amounts because if I make a ton of money from a few donations that happen regularly versus not so much money from a lot of donations that happen, a lot of times I'm going to want to sink my development energy into those higher dollar values. So maybe I can go in here and I can go ahead and add that I want to summarize. I show my detail rows and I want to summarize the amount field. So now I see that I've got not only the record count in any given row, but I've also got the amount in any given row. And if I click on any of these quadrants, it's going to show me the records that fit those two constraints. So event tickets sold in November of 2017, here's the 3 of them if I click on it. If I want to see event tickets in January of 2018, I click on that box, so on and so forth. So this is getting pretty neat at this point. We are starting to really get clear on, as time goes on, how much are we making by month by record type. And I've also got this total over here of dollars, so I can look and see, yeah, I made $2,000, $3,000, $300 in December, but then January rolled around and I made $152,000, and then $290,000, and then $780,000. And I can start to pull out these patterns of, wait a second, I'm making a lot of money in the first half of the year there. Does that repeat over and over? And I can scroll down and I can say, well, here's what it looks like here. I had a great October in 2018. But look, in 2019, January was okay, but February, March were big again. April was small. Does that go into 2020? And I scroll down and, oh, look, no, the beginning of the year was really low for that year. But April was huge. We had a $2 million deal. So you can start to identify what's going on here. So this is all well and good. This is a really useful way to approach data. The last question is it going to be better if it's visualized, if we add a chart? How could that help us visualize so that when we're talking to our stakeholders, our board, or our program team, or our development team, or the people that we want to take action on this, that we are getting them to pay attention instead of just looking at a chart full of numbers. So if we add a chart, that's going to be where we start to create some extra value. This type of chart could be really valuable, right? Just looking at the sum of the amount. That could be really great. We can also go in and create a stacked bar where we stack it by opportunity record type. And now we're starting to see something that's kind of interesting. If I look at my bar graph, I look at my legend, grants are where I am pulling in almost all of my money. There aren't any of these that really situate in on any of the other options here. So like event tickets, they're in here. If I put my mouse over here, I can see, oh, I had $43 worth of event tickets sold in July 2018. But it's so small it barely even registers on the meter. But look at this, in April 2020, I had $2 million worth of donation, just donation. May of 2020, I had $34,000 worth of donation, but still a bolus dose of $670,000 in grants. And this starts to be really interesting data that I can say, oh my goodness, look, all we're really doing is donation and grants. We've been getting steadily better at getting donations. And oh my gosh, in the last multiple months, we haven't closed any grants, but we're still bringing in a good amount of money. This type of visualization is where we want to end up when we're planning out our reports, but we have to know what we're shooting for. We have to know the objects that are related, the types of records that we want returned so that we don't fill our report with useless data, right? This is looking at all the data in my system. I might only want the last 3 years of data, and then I would have to go in and filter my close date for sometime in the last 3 years. And that would change a lot of things in here. If I went to 2020, or 2019 rather, January 1, and then went to today. It's going to simplify a lot of this. And now I've only got 3 years worth of data in here. And maybe I don't care about month, maybe I care about fiscal quarter. And I might want to graph by that so that there's fewer rows in here that people could get lost in. But All of that happens at the end, and a lot of us end up wanting to do that in the beginning. The important part in the beginning is identify what you want the report to do. What do you want it to show? And then work from there to identify what objects are involved. How do I filter those records so that I only get the records I want? And then how do I group things so that it's useful information, so I'm not just looking at 119 separate records in this case? And then how can I start to display that visually so that it is meaningful to my constituents? Because a stacked bar graph is great, but maybe I really want a donut, or maybe I want some other thing that shows me, okay, look, here's by month, interesting. Maybe I want a scatter plot because I'm really trying to show that a lot of our stuff is random. Oh, look, and there's this really clear pattern. So these types of things you have to plan out ahead of time, but knowing how to go through this process, it's more than just open up any old report and start filtering and hope for the best. It really does take intention up front in the beginning, and you spend most of your time deciding what you want the report to do. And then you can kind of finagle your way through, see if you need to create a custom report type based on the objects in your org, make sure that the fields you need are added to those report types that you're using. You can start to filter them, group them, and display them. So those are the steps that I use and that I generally recommend people go through when you're designing a report that you're going to bring to stakeholders. If you're just a data nerd and you don't mind looking at tons of rows in spreadsheets, then you probably don't need the visualization, and maybe you could just summarize, maybe make a matrix table. But at the end of the day, if you are presenting this to other people and you need them to take action on it, it's super important that it displays what you want in a way that's approachable to the people who are going to be viewing it. So that's our how to actually put together a report in Salesforce for a nonprofit. I hope that's useful. If you've got any questions or if you want some help building reports in your org, feel free to reach out via the comment section below or email me directly at tom@greaterimpact.co. And until next time, keep up the awesome work of creating a greater impact in your organization.